Welcome to the Code with Jason meetup. Today we're doing another session with our friend Felipe. We did a session, I think a week ago, where we did
Yeah.
some pair programming and added some tests to some code that was heretofore testless. So, Felipe, if you're ready, why don't you go ahead and share your screen and we can get into it.
I think you need to enable.
Oh, yep, I will do that. Here we go. Uh-huh. All right, you should be able to share now.
Right.
Okay. So either way is completely fine, but is it in the same place as last time or have you added some stuff since then?
No, it is in the same place as last time. There's this one commit that I wanted to include in the recording if anyone was following the whole Odyssey from
Yeah.
from from the beginning. So I'm just adding this dependency for the network, like the HTTP gem that I used that
Hmm.
was not properly declared in the gem spec. And besides that, everything is the same here. I did put in some thought into how I would like continually like move forward in adding tests.
Hmm.
And things here they both depend on like the structure's main function, which is like performing API requests and loading them into the database. It depends on network requests and the database and active record.
Hmm.
So I was a bit lost, and I'm really excited to see how you decide to go about this. But a couple of things I thought of. I first checked the Rails plugins was a name I was struggling to come up with in the last session when
Hmm.
we were looking into an unnecessary dependency on active support. Uh, though the gems I was thinking of that have like this more like they are completely dependent on Rails and meant to be only used within the context of a Rails application
Hmm.
are plugins, and Rails has a generator for them.
Hmm.
And the way they go about testing that is that the gems declare a dependency in Rails itself.
Okay.
I think I should maybe improve the font size. Is it readable?
Yeah, yeah.
And they include an entire dummy Rails application. So when you run the gems tests, it boots up this this Rails app that it includes in the test folder. So this YAFL thing is the output for this Rails plugin new YAFL. So that might be a thing to keep in mind if we end up needing to test things that we if we want to keep the tests coupled to Rails that much. This way that the guides documents the achieves this by including an entire dummy application.
Hmm.
And another thing I have ready, if uh, we think it might be a more useful route, is that thinking about the weirdness that like at least for my I don't have a lot of experience, but it seems that much of the weirdness besides the overall messiness of the code is that we are testing a Ruby gem that depends on Rails. So I also have ready a working Rails application that has the extractor, just the couple files it uses within the app folder. So it runs, it works, and then it would like be like we could add tests to it the same way we would add tests to any Rails application. Like this would work with. features with the whole Rails testing setup. But we can. I'm excited to continue as we were on the gem, but I have the that alternative path ready if you think it would be better.
Okay. Yeah, I say we just play it by ear and keep going as we were before. And if we run into anything that we feel like we need to address in a different way, we can cross that bridge when we come to it. But I say for now, let's just keep going on what we were before.
Awesome. So the last thing we did in our previous adventure was defining this test case for when the parameters, so the items that are to be extracted, to be downloaded, are passed an array type, and then it should be able to uh, give you a next value that is either one by one or in batches, which
Yeah,
technically
and
are.
sorry, Felipe, for anybody seeing this video for the first time who didn't see the last video,
Mhm.
um, can you give like a 1 or 2 sentence description of what it is we're working on?
Yes.
Just like
So,
what the
mhm.
library is for.
So this is Extractor, a gem I've developed that is meant for facilitating downloading a lot of data from APIs, and it implements this massively described cycle of getting a page from the API, validating if it's valid, saving it to the database, getting the next page, and also performing HTTP retries. So this is all defined in this step model here, the step file, and it is inspired by Singer Taps, which is a Python library that inspired me to create the Ruby version.
Okay. And I see you included a link in the README to the previous
Mm-hmm.
video, even with its mildly insulting name of adding tests to a messy Ruby library or whatever it was. Yeah.
I thought it was really gracious. The use nasty, I think it's quite a compliment.
Um, yeah, okay. All right. Yeah, so you were showing some of the tests we had from last time.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a vague memory that we had some idea of what we wanted to maybe do next, but I don't remember for sure. Maybe we can look at the code again.
Yeah, so this code, which is notably difficult, like it really feels like it's like an experienced programmer created it to be difficult to like easily parse out testable blocks. And so by like just looking at it, you figure out that this next value method, dependent on a bunch of, well, specifically three instance variables, and we could just pass those as arguments. And now it does not anymore, and still seems to work. And it is also doing two different things. It is iterating in through the case where the parameter is an array, so it should be each successive call to next value should return a a batch of array items, or it should increment the value by one in case it's in an integer and we are counting up.
Sorry, Felipe, can you bump up that font size
Yeah,
a couple
sorry.
books?
Yeah.
That's okay.
One
Perfect.
more.
I think that should be good. I think that's good.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and let's talk a bit about what we did last time. So,
Mm-hmm.
I'll say for context, like testing is a skill, but then adding tests to existing code is like a whole different skill. Just because somebody knows how to write tests doesn't mean that they know how to apply tests to existing code. And the kind of tragic thing is like a lot of people come to me and want to learn testing for the first time. And the reason they want to is they want to add tests retroactively to some existing code. And I'm like, well, I got sad news for you. Not only do you have to learn testing, but also in addition to that, you have to learn the much harder skill of adding tests to existing code. So you're on like a multi-year journey and you probably won't see progress until a really long time from now. That's the unfortunate reality of this situation, which is another argument for like including tests right from the very beginning, which is not to try to criticize you, Felipe. That's a message for the world.
Yeah, I see
Okay.
that
Yeah.
if it wasn't for our sessions here and I like this advantage of pairing with a developer who's experienced with this very difficult thing of adding tests to currently untested messy code, I would throw this all out and
Uh-huh.
rewrite it for sure. Like there's no chance I would even like I maybe I might attempt it for like a day and I would be like sure that it would be way easier to re-implement this from scratch, writing tests from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you'd probably be right about that. Obviously, quite a lot of code bases are so large and there's so much depending on them that a rewrite is not
Yeah,
realistic.
not an option. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And now seems like a good time for me to insert this message. Dear YouTube viewer, I offer consulting services where I help you retroactively add tests to your untested code. Email me at code with email me at jason@codewithjason.com to start a conversation. Okay, sales pitch over. Um, so it's kind of interesting what we did. I didn't really think about this at the time, but like we took what were formerly instance variables, current value, parameter, and request for batch size, and they actually still are
Mm-hmm.
instance variables, but we took them and for this next value method, we made it so it doesn't use those instance variables. Instead, we pass in values. So like when something is an instance variable, I'm like just articulating this for the first time right now. When something is an instance variable, then you like instantiate the object, and the object can change state as the code is executed. Various instance variables might change value, and you kind of have not a lot of control. But if you change it so that instead of having instance variables, you pass values around in methods, then you have a lot tighter control and you can write a test for those methods independently. And also, the code is arguably easier to understand because there's kind of a blurry line between instance variables and global variables, and they have similar costs. Like everybody always says, like, don't use global variables. But rarely do people say, why shouldn't we use global variables? And the reason why is because whenever there's a global variable, you don't really know what has happened to that global variable or what's going to happen to it, what's going to need it in the future. So like, is it safe to use this global variable? I don't know because I don't know what has happened to it. And is it safe to modify this global variable? I don't know because I don't know what else downstream is going to need this value. Similar with instance variables. And so we've taken this kind of uncertain situation and we've made it a little bit more certain because now we don't have to worry about what has happened to this value or what's going to need it later because we know that every value that this next value method uses is scoped only to that method and it's not going to have side effects beyond this method and the side effects of previous actions aren't going to have an influence over what happens in this method.
Yeah, and just by doing this to this one method, I could thinking about this whole class, I realized that probably this last response instance variable might be the only thing I want to keep as an
Mm,
instance variable,
okay.
and probably everything else would be there was no need for them to be an instance variable. But as I was developing this gem, I was using instance variables that were not part of its API when I was writing my own extractors. And so maybe like I would in the function where I was defining which page I wanted to download, I would use the pages I have already downloaded or the remaining pages to check for something. So I would in the tap methods use like those instance variables, but in the end, with the weird API I've came up with, I think maybe only that last response one would still be worthy
Mm,
to have, maybe in the cases where we're iterating through APIs that want an offset, like they give you like the next batch will start at offset 50 and then you pass 50 to the next request.
mm,
And so in that case, being able to in this edge case check the last value response may be worth it. Maybe there's another
mm-hmm.
way. Maybe it could be just a method, but I think this is fine. Everything else that starts with an at here, there's no reason for it to do so.
Okay. Okay. Um, and one thing that I hope can come out of this is it would sure be nice if we could develop like some heuristics for adding tests to existing code. Like
Mm-hmm.
historically, when I've added tests to existing code, I just kind of use my intuition. I don't really have like a set process that I go through. I just kind of like
Mm-hmm.
figure out how to do it. But that's not something that's like easily explainable to somebody else. Like it would be great if we
Yeah.
could come up with, again, some heuristics, such
Mm-hmm.
as look at the instance variables first, and the instance variables are often a good entry point. Maybe that's a heuristic. I don't know. But let's go with that idea for a little bit, and maybe
Mm-hmm.
let's look at some of the other instance variables or the other instances of using instance variables, and maybe those will be good points to work at. I maybe don't want to go to the perform method yet because that one seems tricky. Let's start at the very
Mm-hmm.
top of the class.
Okay.
Okay. So what is the first one I see there is auth. What is auth?
This is just it's a named parameter. It's not used by the extractor class except for setting an account ID in the requests. So the model I use to save, no models, schema. So the model I use to save the requests to the database has an account ID column,
Mm-hmm.
which is usually new. But there are cases when, let's say, you wanted to download maybe like commits or repositories from many GitHub accounts, and
Mm-hmm.
you would use the same tab, and you want a way to identify which account they came from, which might not be included in GitHub's responses for every endpoint. Like some endpoints might just assume that given that you're using the access token for this account, that's what you're downloading.
Mm-hmm.
And since we do all the parsing using SQL later, it is necessary in some cases to have this account ID. So
Okay.
this is just the only time it uses that is this. It could simply be an like a string, and the user could like just pass like implement their own authentication. Like we currently, my team usually also sets like the access token or maybe like cookies when we're doing some web scraping. Those values are set in this named parameter,
Mm-hmm.
but that is completely unnecessary. Like the person could implement it all here, and all
Mm-hmm.
this tab class needs to know is the account ID. If it's present, it should be saved to the request model when we save the requests.
Okay. Um, I'm thinking. So, okay. I'm struggling to understand a little bit. You said something or other is completely unnecessary. What is the thing that's not necessary?
Mhm. So this is not this. It's not necessary for this to be a hash.
Uh-huh.
We only use its account ID key.
Okay, I was thinking the same thing. But I was thinking also maybe I was wrong because it looks like if auth is present and the account ID is blank, then you want to give a warning. But that implies that if the account ID is blank, but auth is not present, then you don't. Oh, but were you maybe just checking for the presence of auth so that when you check for auth account ID, it doesn't give an error?
It might be, but I think uh, also the thing this is trying to set is, as I said, the my team sets access tokens in this hash, so they would
Hmm.
use them. Like, let's say if this request was authenticated, they
Hmm.
would simply like say it was authenticated in a weird way using query strings. They
Yeah,
could simply just interpolate from auth, like auth,
I see.
auth, and use have the zoom window over this. So like auth as access token, for example. And
Mhm.
I think what I was trying to avoid there is having this defined, but not having a way to know from which account this access token was for, because I
Okay,
think I at the time I thought there was a an easy mistake, an easy thing for them to forget, since this is
okay,
not explicitly set anywhere. So if you are performing authenticated requests, you probably want to save some ID with those requests, because frequently access tokens do not include it. But this is not a like it's not a necessary check for the gem to perform. Like it
got
only
it.
from all of this, all it actually needs is to like have an account ID that it when it's inserting requests, it will fill this out either with the string that was passed or nil.
Okay. So instead of a hash, we could just accept an account ID.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. And before we even do that, I'm curious about something. So this class is called tap. Can you show me an example of the tap class being instantiated and used?
Yes. So it is designed to be inherited by the practical implementations of it. So
I
this
see.
that goes through the placeholder API. So I can just command Z my way back to the original thing. And so it implements this perform method that calls the functions that the user has defined and maybe even overwritten. It's really weird. API. So here we would run the example tap by grabbing an instance of it and calling its perform method.
Okay.
Perform, and that downloads each post from this posts API until this returns true, until response.body is exactly the string. That's how we know we've reached the end. And also if we get a response that does not include an integer ID key, like a value for the key ID is a valid integer, we retry this request. And that's all that is
Okay.
configured here.
Okay. And what arguments does the initializer take? Obviously auth. I don't remember if there's anything else.
Well, it's terrible. So the first parameter is this optional positional argument that is called parameter, and this usually would be in the when it's an array, the gem like figures that out, and so here we were running in the case that it's not an array, so we downloaded posts slash 18 right after posts slash 17. So as our test demonstrates, when it's not an array and we are at 147, we expect next value to return 148.
Okay.
And that's it. It would increment by 1. And if we pass it an array, so let's say 37, 3, 7, and 37, and run this, what it, there's some issue here, not sure. 3,
Okay.
7,
I
3,
was just
7.
curious because I
Yeah.
saw you
Mm-hmm.
initialize example tap with no arguments, and I was mildly
Mm-hmm.
surprised that that was
Yeah,
possible. But now I see
yeah,
that both
it
those
is.
arguments are optional.
Yes, both are. And so let's get it back here. Yeah. So these two are optional, and you would use off, which should be just a string. And all it will do is fill this column out for your for you to reference later when you are modeling with SQL. So when you are arriving at the nicely parsed out tables for the analytical side of things, you can separate the requests, the responses you're working with, uh, like you can tell which came from which account, and that's all that parameter, this optional parameter does.
Mm-hmm.
And this one, it only does something if it's an array, and otherwise it's a weird messy thing that like it has no effect on the tab class behavior, but it does it sort of becomes part of the API as it's available here. So I could use it for something. And I don't think we use that. It's a weird thing I was thinking about when trying to make like all the different before this gem, all the different classes that we had implemented with this same job of iterating through all pages of an API. I wanted them to look as much alike as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought like maybe we'll just accept a single parameter, and that's how you know like these are the things I need to pass it to have it working. Like this is not very good design. It's just it's a weird idea I had, and nothing really depends on it. Like this first named argument could simply be maybe like either an array or new, and it could be just like a better name we came up with between when writing the test. It could be items should be extracted. Like it could be as
Okay.
simple as this. This is the only actual functionality of it.
Okay. Okay. Um, and part of why I want to understand all this is because, like, in theory, we could just replace auth with account ID, and that would make things a bit simpler. But
Yes, we can. Mhm.
I'm not actually sure whether that would take us in the direction we want to go or not. I think it probably would, but I'm not 100% sure yet. And I
Mm-hmm.
want to be a little more sure about where we think we're headed before we start making more changes. One observation is that obviously all the code is in the tap class. Um, but maybe what we ultimately are going to want is a constellation of classes with different purposes. I'm not sure how that would go. Um, and so maybe, okay. So another thing that is a common pattern with my consulting clients is we'll look at the code and it's like, yes, the code needs tests and it could benefit from better structure and stuff like that. But even bigger than that and more important is the like conceptual model of the application is, well, it was never really designed in a lot of cases.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so before we go further, um, I want to like make an assessment of our conceptual design and see like how do we want to think about everything? How do we want to model everything? And then once we have an idea in our heads about how we model want to model things, then we can apply those ideas to the code. But if we start messing with the code first, I feel like that would be kind of backwards.
Awesome. So yeah, we what this class is like it does a bunch of things, but it has the responsibility of performing the API requests with some retry behavior.
Hmm.
So we want to make it easy for the user, since this is for analytical data. So we're like never doing a post request, we're never writing to an API.
Hmm.
If the data, like we want an easy way for the user to check if the data is in the format expected. And if it's not, we'll simply fire off the request again, but using the exponential backoff retry strategy because we are polite to the
Hmm.
people hosting the APIs we're using. And so this is one responsibility. The other responsibility is to save those to the database in this known requests model table format. So it knows how to, from a response object, fill everything out here.
Hmm.
And there are a couple quirks here, like maybe it's saving an error. So I append error to the class name. So maybe you could have like a few ones that are example type errors for debugging. It's an option that you can set. So
Hmm.
the class like the that responsibility includes some exceptions like that. And then there is the sequencing responsibility. So for most cases, like this, I'd say close to a bit less than half, but close to half of the APIs, we extract data from daily in my business the sequential start at one and go up by one until some condition is met is enough. Like this is the base sequencing behavior which determines the next request we want to make after each successful one.
Okay. Okay, let's start to think about the concepts involved. So one concept that's clearly involved is a request.
Mm-hmm.
That much is clear. And I can imagine a scenario where we have a request class. Um, what are some other concepts that exist?
So there's validation and sequence.
Okay. Validation, like what gets validated, the request itself or the response body?
Just the response body. Well, this response object is a Chifeus, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Its
Yeah.
response object includes the request, like it includes the request parameters. So a user could access it, but I don't think there's any use of that that I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
So the response body after the the request is made is validated, and if it's valid, it gets saved to the database. And if it's not valid, we check if this is like a reach it end response type, or we retry it.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Okay, so there's you said retry. Yeah, Sanjeet.
So when you say you validate, are you checking whether if some mandatory elements are there? Is that type of thing that you are doing or something else?
Well, here on lines 15 through 17 is an example of this, what I'm calling validation, which is simply asserting that the response JSON output has an ID key and its value is a valid integer.
Integer. That's all. Okay. Okay. I understood. Yeah.
That's all.
Okay.
There's no validation beyond that.
Beyond that. Okay.
And the reason I think this is probably enough is that we do the parsing later using SQL, and
Okay.
then we can like split out, even if there are missing keys and things, we can do like maybe case statements. But I think like if it looks enough like the response we're expecting, like it has an ID key,
Okay.
I think this is
Understood.
good enough for us to want to save it to the database.
Yeah. Okay. Understood.
Okay, so Felipe, can you take us back to the code, the tab class? Um, okay. And am I crazy or did the font size go back to smaller? Maybe I just
I
got
think
used to
the
the new
same.
font
No, I
size.
think I think not sure, but yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, okay. So we had been looking at auth because it was just the first thing in there.
Hmm.
To be honest, I'm not sure what to do about that. Um,
Hmm.
so maybe we can just leave that alone for the time being and come back later. Um, I'm looking now at request. So okay. So now I'm thinking about like now that we've thought about the conceptual model a little bit, obviously there's a lot more thinking we're going to want to do, but we thought about requests and responses and validation. Maybe now that we look at this code some more, we can think about where those ideas might fit in. Um,
Yeah, I think the
mhm,
sequencing behavior uh, might be interesting since we've we started with part of it, the next value, which is like maybe the essential part of the sequencing behavior,
mhm,
and we the way this class currently implements it, it supports giving you batches of an array you pass it or incrementing the value by one.
mhm.
And like it seems like I'm not sure if you would agree, but it seems like a thing we could extract to a external class or classes, and there's some interesting decisions on how we would switch these two behaviors. Like I think there's a simple class to be written that just gives you out array batches, and another one that increments by one. But there's some interesting switching logic between those two behaviors, and also they are designed to be overridable. So this first value method here, so first value and next value could be re-implemented here. And so in this case, the user of the tab would be using none of the default sequencing behaviors.
Okay,
And
sorry, I'm going to interrupt. So moving some of the sequencing behavior into a different class, for all I know, that's a great idea. But I want to start with something easier because the sequencing stuff to me seems maybe not so easy. But taking the idea of a request and putting that in a class, to me that seems like it could be relatively easy, especially because the request class wouldn't have to do everything from the start that it's ultimately going to do. It could maybe be pretty empty at the beginning, so we could just
right.
get a placeholder started, and that would be like a beachhead, and we can expand from there.
Okay.
So can you take me back to the top where we first start to use request for method name? Okay, so I figured this out last time, but it might not be obvious to you, dear viewer, that request for method name is not request for method name, it's request for method name.
Yes.
Okay, request
So
for method name. Can you remind me what this one's all about, Felipe?
yes. So for you or terrified viewers out there, this is this method that users of the class implement. They define a request for method that receives a value and knows how to perform a request for that given value. But in the weird case we were looking at, where you want to pass an array and receive batches of the array items, so you want to download a bunch of random IDs from an API, you could rename your request for
Oh
method
yeah.
to request for 20 values, and then you would receive a batch of 20 values. Say, like, you could then join them to, let's say, a comma or something, and maybe your API gets them as IDs in a query parameter or something. So yeah, this is the remarkably weird API design I came up with a year or something ago.
Okay.
So that's why we don't know the method name, because
Yeah, I remember that now. Okay. I'm thinking. So the request can have, okay, that there was that array, that group of IDs or whatever. What might we call that thing? It's like a specification for the IDs we want to get or something like that. What is that thing?
yeah, this was something we thought about a bit in the last session. We came up with items to be extracted, which is way better than parameters, which is what it is. Parameter singular is what it's currently called.
Uh-huh.
And it could be like maybe list of IDs, or like even list of items would be a better name.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, I think, a general name. Like ID and item are not very meaningful, but I think it might be fine to have a general name here, because it's for a what I apparently, it seems to me, a general purpose. Like it's like you want to perform requests to this list of IDs, and it doesn't, like, this class might not need to know any more than that. Like,
Okay.
here are 20 strings, give them to me one at a time, and I'll perform the requests as I know how to by this method. Which, let's switch it back to less.
And when we pass that array of items to extract or whatever, is there being like is there like a filter being performed? Is that how that works?
A slight thing at best. So we might, so if we don't rename the request for methods, we would be receiving them one at a time, and that's all we would do. So it would give us the first value, then the second and the third, and then we wouldn't need this method, and it would just stop. Like this, the sequencing behavior is so that when it has called this method for each value in your array, it stops. And if you implement this weird thing I did, you will get the values 40 at a time if the API you're using allows you to download, say, 40 customer IDs in batches. You're gonna get them in batches of 40, and it's gonna be done once it has given you each value and receives a valid request. So it only calls or only tested method here once the response passes validation.
Okay. So there's some kind of there's okay. So you can either perform requests like serially, or you can do it in batches.
Which are also performed serially, but each request can handle more than one array item, but it would be a single request, like in the case. Oh, I think I've lost it on the.
Tell me if this is right. Either
Mhm.
there's a series of requests which each return one item, or there's a series of requests which each return a batch of items.
Exactly.
Okay. So I don't know. So you might call this like a request strategy or something like that.
Yes, yes. This is so that we would have this case, and the single value case
Yeah.
and the batch value case.
Yeah. Okay. Um, I understand that. What I don't understand yet is when, like at the bottom here, it says example.tap.new 1243 blah blah blah. Um, where does the specification of specific numbers come into the picture?
Specification of specific numbers.
Yeah, because I understand the idea of saying like, give me this in batches of 20 or 40 or whatever, but I don't understand yet why you'd be saying like, is it like give me a batch that includes items 1, 2, 4, 3, 24, 5, and 34? Is that what that means?
So for example, we have this, yeah, with like integer values, like integer IDs, it doesn't really makes a lot of sense. We have this Brazilian marketplace called Mercado Libre, which, oh, great. Just so items. So yeah, this using this ideas as examples would make a lot more sense.
Oh, Mercado
So
Libre,
yeah,
market library or market book?
it means free market.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so this is an ID, and in our day-to-day e-commerce operations, we frequently need to download this JSON, the information for many of these IDs.
Okay.
And Mercado Libre allows us to get one of them in this syntax, and it also allows us to download them like this. Oh, I passed it something wrong here. I think this. Oh, it has.
Okay,
There.
so you can give it an array of specific IDs.
Yes, and then you can. Yeah. So here. So one was not found, and one is this one.
Got it. Okay.
So yeah, so it allows us to download this one, and it's up to 20. So if we have,
Okay. Sorry, Felipe, can we make a note of something before I forget it? Just wherever you want to make a note, if we could just write something down.
sure, let's go to the,
Yeah.
maybe a new file here.
Yeah. Um, okay. So I'm not sure if this is right, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I wanted to note is that there's like three ways to make a series of requests. We can either do it, we can either do a series of individual items. It's like a series of requests where each request is for an individual item. We can do a series of requests where each request is for a batch of items. I want to be more precise, where each request is for a batch of a certain number of items. And then there's a third kind of request where we do just a single request for a batch of specific items that we specify.
I'm not sure if items, um, like this is correct. Your like the way you've stated it is correct, but it does not concern it does not concerns us when we are building the request and even performing the request. If it returns multiple items or not, we'll just have a user provided validate method. That is all we need to
Mhm.
know, if it's
Yeah, that's
valid or
fine.
not.
I'm
And
thinking, apart from anything to do with the code or how the API works or anything like that, I'm just thinking at the highest level of like, at the conceptual level, there's like three ways we can use this tool.
yes, this is correct. The first, so let's write that down. So we have a request that returns a single information, maybe about a single item, not sure. Request returns a single item that we give, weird. So request returns a single like specified item that we like passed it, single specific item. Is that
Okay.
single specific specific ah specific.
IFIED.
Yeah.
Or sorry, I spelled the wrong word. You got it. Request that
So,
returns a single specific item. Okay.
and there's, oh yeah, this would work fine in Markdown, but yeah, so there is a request that return, so yeah, request that returns a single specific item, or request that returns a batch of specific items, and there's also the request that returns, oh, the request that returns a batch of like paginated or unspecific like items that we do not control. I think this
Yeah.
is what you meant by the third case, right?
Yeah.
Or
Mm-hmm.
batch of paginated slash unsorted or
Yeah, there has to be a term for this.
so. Yeah. So this we deal with. Yeah, the only case I can come up with actually is pagination. So this happens when we are working to list all the IDs we have in the marketplace. It's a paginated request, and we go through the pages and receive a list of these IDs and unordered, just like page one, page two. And so what the tab class needs to know is that it should start at page one and go until we receive an empty list. And that's how we know.
Yeah, okay. So I want to make sure we're being clear about requests and series of requests, because right now we're speaking in terms of requests, but we're not saying anything about series of requests, and I think that's probably important.
So in the first case, a requester returns a single specific item. So let's maybe rewrite this phrase to be a series of
Okay.
requests that each return
Sorry, as long as we're
uh,
correcting that, return, you got,
yeah
yeah,
uh,
okay.
yeah, I don't like that the specific item is at the end, because that's kind of backwards. Like what characterizes this series is that for each request we are specifying the item we want. I think.
Yeah,
Uh, let me work through the other ones as we
yeah.
a series of requests that each return a batch of specific items. A batch of head paginated items. Yeah, I'm not really like in love with the text here, like how it's written, but
Yeah. Well, we can
it
work on
does.
that.
Go ahead.
Um, I don't understand the idea of a series of requests that each return a single specific item. Like we're specifying the IDs or whatever of the items we want, and then a series of requests are being made based on those. Is that how that works?
Yes. So um, this would be the case where we are maybe giving it a array of IDs, and it's going through that array and downloading each ID individually. And so the return here is like mostly not a concern besides the retrying logic. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
because
Mhm. Yeah. So I think, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think maybe the significant thing is, or rather the most significant thing is the way in which we're specifying what we want.
yes, yes. And then these, yes. So these two scenarios, we have a single value specifying uh, how what we want. In this case, maybe an ID and maybe a page number. So this would be, we have a bunch of IDs and we want to perform a request for each of them individually. And this would be, we have an either known or unknown number of pages, and we want to start from one and increment.
Okay.
And so this case, we would want to, let's actually get a practical example. So this request would return us these two IDs, and
Mhm.
maybe we would use this with like Mercado Libre tab, go on new, and pass it like an array of these items.
Mhm.
Mm, yeah. So another one, and another one.
Yeah. Okay.
And this would be if it supported maximum batch size was 2.
Yeah.
And this could also be used. Ideally, this would be different APIs for the example, but it
Mhm.
could also be used in this case where we are retrieving a single item, um, which for Mercado Libre we would not probably like, we would always use this since it performs fewer requests, it's
Mhm.
faster. But there are APIs that do not allow any sort of batching. So in this case, we would also give it an array, but each request would look like this.
Yeah.
And then there is, so let's make up the pagination URL because it's actually complicated, but
Mhm.
let's say it's like sellers, the ID of the seller, and then like say item slash search, and it takes a page equals oh yeah, page equals 1. Let's say we want to begin there, and the way we would call this would be more like this case with a
Yeah.
new, and this is the value that would start at 1 and go up until some condition, like however an empty page looks on this specific API, like this endpoint.
Yeah. Okay. So we have to wrap up soon, but I have maybe one more thought to share before we go. So like maybe instead of initializing the tap object with like an array or no array and that kind of thing, um maybe we actually have an object that a different object that represents the strategy that we want to use and the configuration settings and such, and then we pass in that object when we initialize a tap. So like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, we have single specific item, batch of specific items, batch of paginated items. Okay. It's like a request strategy. We can change it later if we decide we're not happy with it, but would you try this just in the same document
Yeah.
here? Maybe you could type like request strategy.new.
We would have a request strategy. And so, yeah, it would probably be, I'm not sure if it would be actually be a good thing to keep this API that knows whether it's an array or not. We could maybe have a factory that toggles between those, but well, let's go through it. So currently, we could give it the same arguments that actually it's not a perform method, it's the new initializer, the new method receives, and then we would have this and also a empty request strategy that we could pass
Yeah.
the
And now that I see that, I realize it's not really a strategy because there's more to it than just the strategy.
the
There's
values
what we're
actually
asking for, yeah.
mm-hmm.
So maybe it's not a strategy. What is it? I had it in my mind a second ago. Oh yeah, okay. So we have requests, and then we have like this series of requests. And even a request, a series can still have just one single request in it. Yeah, that could still be considered a series.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's like maybe, okay, what is like a series of requests called? It's like a retrieval or something like that. Or maybe it's a session, or maybe it's just a series.
Yeah, this I think about this a lot. There are like ways in which knowing more about how this array came to be, like later in when we are in the analytical side of things,
Mm-hmm.
that it would be important in the future to know if, like, say, this was an exhaustive list of all the items or not, was a partial update. There are this concept of what exactly is the intent behind this series of requests or this list of items that
Okay.
it's really good to be thinking through this, even if
Yeah.
through the perspective of the current code. But uh,
So I had a
m-
stroke of genius just now, Felipe. Um, Instead of request strategy, how about fetch operation?
wow, yes, mm-hmm. This is
Yeah. And then
the
what is that
yeah.
array? What is it an array of? It's the items we're fetching.
Mm-hmm.
It could even, I mean, if we just said items,
Yes, yes, I think items is good in this case, even if it's meaningless.
I mean, it's like the fact that it's connected to fetch operation gives it meaning. It's like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
items. What
items
what what
should
items
be
are these? Oh,
fetched.
it's the fetch operations items.
Yes, yes, this is a really good name.
Um, okay, well, let's end on a high note.
Mm-hmm.
Um, oh, and yeah, bye Sanjit. Thanks for coming.
I sent you.
Um,
Thank you.
okay, yeah, let's end it there, and then maybe next time we can think about how to incorporate this concept of a fetch operation into the tap class.
This is really cool. I think I might need to document what I do from today to then, because I don't think I'll resist waiting for the next session to try and implement this. This
Oh
is
yeah, yeah, go for it.
awesome. Jason, thank you very much. It's been really fun and incredibly useful, but like clarifying of what this thing does to have these chats.
Yeah, great.
We'll
I'm
talk
happy to
next
hear that.
time.
Yeah, and thank you. And one last little thing, dear viewer. Again, this is one of the things I do for consulting. Contact me at jason@codewithjason.com if you're interested in doing exactly this kind of thing, like what I'm doing with Felipe right now. All right, Felipe, thanks again for coming, and talk to you next time.
Bye.